Well, hello. Welcome to Llansteffan, here with me today, and welcome to the word for the week. And it's a word for the week that isn't meant to leave us weak, but to make us and leave us strong through the things that we need to face up to. So, what are we dealing with today? James has delivered the greeting for a meeting without coffee. We looked at that last time. Very direct, very frank talk is coming from himself, James the Just, the Lord's brother, half-brother. And now James plunges straight into a very direct, frank talk with them, addressed from himself to Jewish believers scattered, either voluntarily or because of persecution or politics, across the Roman-occupied provinces of that then-known world. We saw last time the circumstances of their lives. Today we'll just remember they're in alien territory where life for them is no cakewalk, and they're feeling the effects of alienation and marginalization. And they stand out as the weird bunch, and they're suffering in many trials where they are. But this next section, this first section, real main section of the book, for all its directness, it does begin by addressing James's hearers as brothers. Brothers, he says. Well, in fact, that's a language marker that runs throughout the book, separating the sections of the book, indicating to us that a fresh section is starting every time he says brothers. Now, these verses 2 to 12, are the positive side of the coin of this section, verses 2 to 18, with verses 13 to 18 put on the negative side of things before verse 19 starts a new section, a new topic, signaled by the use of the word brothers again. So, verses 2 to 12, then, of this first chapter of James are the first part of this first section. I get stuck into the text straight away then. First up, James is addressing here the difficulties these readers are facing, specifically how to think about and therefore respond to these problems they've got. Real problems, how do you respond? That's the controllable feature in the whole thing. He's saying when you experience troubles and difficulties, see what God is doing for you through these difficulties and rejoice that he's forming maturity in you and giving perseverance all the way through to your heavenly home in glory for you. There's obviously a bit more to it than just that. So first of all then, the practice of perseverance. He says, first of all, count trials as joy. That's verses 2 to 3 of James chapter 1. What he's saying is that trials are the pathway to, the Greek word is teleosis, maturity. Rejoice about that as you face up to these trials, he says. They're not pointless, they've got purpose, and they're doing something good for you. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, he says, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Consider it pure joy. Now the verb there, again, why, it implies a thoughtful, deliberate judgment. Don't make an emotional reflex, make a sound, thoughtful judgment. Govern your thoughts, he says. In other contexts, it means to lead the way, to take the lead, that one there. To preside over, to sometimes if he's a chief officer in the church, act the one in control of this situation, take hold of your thoughts and consider it pure joy. Take control of and govern your mental and attitudinal response to the circumstances you find yourselves in. Your response to those trials and challenges. James says, get hold of those, first of all. See, James is a book that's big on direct appeals to do something. James has got a greater number of imperatives, do it words, do this words, than any other New Testament book. And his purpose is not so much to inform his readers as to command and exhort and encourage them to certain positive courses of action. Do something, he says. He says that repeatedly. It shows up as an attempt to modify not simply the actions, but the attitudes of the readers here. Consider it pure joy. Now, this section is the first of 3 appeal sections in the main letter. There are general appeals about their response to the consequences of the situation of being settled there in chapter 1, verses 2 to 18. And then there are concluding appeals in chapter 5, verses 12 to 18, concerned there mainly with oaths and prayer and healing, things in their particular local church context that have popped up that are relevant to them. But what I'm trying to say to you is there's a high density of go and do this stuff in this epistle. And that all starts here, very significantly, by addressing the reader's attitude to the stuff that hurts them, but mustn't be allowed to greatly harm them by out-of-control responses. That's going to be the sort of idea, surely, that's going to jar at first with what we and they already believe and think about trials or tests. Let's look into it. The plural is used here, pyrasmos. Tests. It's a word with a broad range of meaning. Moral testing or external suffering, all sorts of things. But in James, it's encompassing a lot of those things. It all sounds pretty insensitive, though, doesn't it, for him to be coming out with this? Consider it all pure joy when you go through many trials. Well, is it? Is it insensitive? If you actually believe what a Christian actually believes, there's nothing more important than going on with God, is there? And here's the thing. Testing is not destroying, it's conditioning. That's what he's saying. One of the things a man notices about aging, so I understand, is the creeping awareness that you're losing muscle mass. Now, that's important, because if that just runs on, you'll find it increasingly hard to, for example, stand up, And that begins to have wider health implications. So what are you going to do? How do you get your muscles stronger? Well, perhaps you go and see the nurse for your regular checkup, and so you're going to decide about this, get some exercise. And when you exercise, you go to the gym. And what do you do in the gym? You lift things that you think are going to be too heavy for you, and you swing things, heavy things, until you're fighting for breath and it hurts a bit, okay? And you test yourself, you see, to see what you can achieve there. And then you go back in a few days' time and you test yourself to see if you can do a bit more. Now, why would you do that? You do it because you're sure that the goal that you're working towards is worth it. And all the time you're exercising like this, what happens to your muscles is they get damaged a little bit. And when the frayed ends of the little fibers heal and join up again, the bond that they have and the strength they've developed is greater than it was before you exercised, leaving you with greater strength, greater stamina, and more developed perseverance for the time when you come back, for the next trial of strength that comes along. And the saying is true, isn't it? That if you train hard, when the time comes, then you can fight easy. It's by coming apart a little bit, hurting a little bit, all in a controlled manner, that you're going to strengthen yourself and gain stamina that will help you persevere. And your coach is there at the gym, making sure you're doing this in a controlled manner. So you're strengthening, not destroying yourself in the process. Well, the thing James is getting at here is this. You won't keep going to the gym if you just hate it. And if you don't keep going to the gym to be tested and tried with the right attitude, you're definitely not going to persevere. And what's the most important point for the Christian in terms of their life outcomes? The most important point for the Christian person is to persevere. So what's your attitude? This James is saying here, keep your head straight on the point of your testing and trials. Or you're going to stop turning up for your testing. And then you're not going to get stronger and you're not going to persevere through them. Keep it clear in your head that the reason God gives you trials at gym time is to make sure that you're going to persevere. Now, the Old Testament prophets have got parallels, Isaiah 48:10. Jesus is teaching in Matthew 5:10-12. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Rejoice and be glad, he says. The end is going to fill with joy the means, says James. The end is going to justify the means. So let's get straight on and look at the ends. Verse 4. Choose maturity, not quick exits, says James. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Oh, that word perseverance is a big word in the Bible. Hupomone. Perseverance, endurance, patience. Patient bearing with it and keeping going on. Patient frame of mind. Enduring. This sort of experience. It's being able to carry your yoke. Now, what's a yoke? If you're of a younger generation, of course, younger generation than mine, I dare say, the idea of carrying a yoke might have passed you by. As a young lad, I had a great grandmother, and she was quite a woman. I remember being told quite a lot about my maternal grandmother. I was privileged to know her, and quite what a hands-on, strong woman she was. killing the pigs, delivering the babies, laying out the dead. And part of that characterization I was receiving of her through the family grapevine and all that stuff was her carrying out around the village, so door to door, the pails of milk that she got from a small number of cows on the small farm and housed the family on the hills above the mining community in the valley below. Now, obviously, a pail of milk weighs a fair bit, doesn't it? It's about 1 kilo a litre, I reckon. And with 2 to carry at a time and up and down steps to the houses, going to be heavy going. As she carried those 2 large pails, which would have been slung beneath the wooden bar that fitted across the shoulders around her neck to spread the weight to make it feasible. I don't suppose she was a woman who needed to go to the gym very much, but imagine how much harder, really not so possible at all, if she hadn't had that bar, that yoke to spread the weight as she carried on her shoulders to control the burden that had to be borne. A perseverance through testing and trials which teaches maturity and then inevitably is fed by realizing what God is doing for you and with you in those trials, says Jake. That spins the load. That takes the weight. That puts it across your shoulders in a way that you can manage the load that it is. Teleotate. See, the aim is spiritual teleosis, completeness or maturity. A central theme of James, and you bear that load, but you have it measured and mitigated for you, and you're able to bear it on your shoulders with the help of God himself. And James 5:11 is going to talk about that end stage, where it all leads, later on in the book. Thirdly then, James says, verse 5, is choose wisdom, not blame games. The trouble with being in a situation of trial and tenseness and difficulty and hardship is that you get into a panic. You don't know what to do. You have knowledge of the situation, you know what it's about, but you don't know what to do with it. And that's where you find you need not knowledge, but wisdom. Where are you going to get that from? Well, James says, verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives it generously to all, without finding fault. See, what verse 5 is doing for us here is it's framing wisdom as essential to completeness and maturity. God gives generously, reflecting his character, out of his wisdom, which is an essential part of who he is. And what he gives is wisdom in those hard and difficult circumstances, so that you behave appropriately in them and don't make the whole situation 10 times worse. Fourthly, he says, verses 6 to 8, choose steady faith and trust in him, not instability. Verses 6 to 8, but when you ask for that wisdom, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave tossed on the sea, blown and tossed by this wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, he says. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Well, verse 6, there's the imagery there, wind-tossed. It evokes Psalm 1, verse 4, and Isaiah 57:20, about the instability of the wicked. Don't be like that. He says, you'll have a divided soul. Jesus says, and no one can serve 2 masters. So trust him when you ask. Otherwise, you'll be blown about everywhere, all over the shop. And fifthly, he says, verses 9 to 11, count what lasts, not what's passing away. See, when you're under pressure and in situations like that, you're going to find yourself turning to all your weaknesses and your insecurities about things like money. Well, he says, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. Count what lasts, says James. See, believers in humble circumstances, he says, ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they'll pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat, withers the plant, its blossom falls, its beauty is destroyed, and in the same way the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business. He's highlighting for them, there's coming a reversal of expectations, this world's expectations. What's going to happen is, well, those rich people that you think, they got it all sorted, they're not suffering the way I am, they're as fragile as wild flowers. Now, there are broader biblical echoes in all of this. Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, it talks about lilies of the field and grass that withers, Matthew 6, 28 to 30. And Jesus teaches on riches very clearly. He says, blessed is the poor, Luke 6, verse 20, but woe to the rich, verse 24 of that very same chapter. There's this reversal motif. James, he says, has not God chosen the poor in chapter 2 and verse 5? The things that you're worrying about not having, they're things that are very fleeting, says James. Under all your pressures, take control of your thinking and see it this way. Now, when James refers to that crown of life, he's not inventing a new idea out of the thin air. His hearers would have immediately thought of the Stephanos, that laurel or olive wreath given to victorious athletes at the games, the great games like the Olympics or the Isthmian Games or something like that. And James picks up that same image when he says, in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, those people, they do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. The point is, just as athletes endure hardship and pain for public glory, so Christians are called to endure trials, perasmoi, for something far greater, eternal reward. But again, James is reframing. Our crown isn't a gold medal pinned on us by the empire or somebody. It's a promise from God himself. Not seen now, but waiting for those who endure. Peter calls it an unfading crown of glory in 1 Peter 5 verse 4. And James tells us it's for those who love God. Language straight from the Old Testament covenant. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 19. Choose life. Love the Lord your God. Revelation picks it up again with powerful clarity. Those who are faithful unto death, especially in persecution, they're going to receive the crown of life, says Revelation 2:10. So this crown ties together all sorts of threads. The athlete's victory, the soldier's honor, the wisdom of the covenant, and the hope of the persecuted. It's a picture of God's kingdom already promised, not yet fully seen, where those who love and trust him, even going through the fire of all the pressures these people James is writing to, will be facing. Those people going through there, faithfully persevering, will be crowned with life itself. James is talking about the great end-time reward of acting on his call to action. But notice this. It's that persevering under trial that shows you truly love God, says James. That person who perseveres through the pressures and the trials will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Now again, back in the Old Testament, loving God, it's closely linked with fidelity, faithfulness to God's covenant to save them. Here's a good question. What is it that actually motivates our own conduct towards God? Do we obey him because we just love him? Or do we try to obey him because we think if we do, he's going to be nice to us? Sort of, I'll just do this and then God will do that for me. You know, if your ethical behavior is motivated like that, that's not Christianity, that's more like paganism. And it's certainly not the Old Testament motivation for lifestyle either. The fundamental summary of the Lord in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today," says Moses from God, "are to be on your hearts." The reward then is clearly, as James writes here, for those who love him. Note the emphasis on love for God as the motivator for endurance, not just obedience. In Old Testament covenantal context, these three ideas, to know God, to love God, and to obey God, come, as it were, in that order. They're the three ideas, not merely parallel ethical imperatives, but there's the heart of faithfulness to God's covenant. Knowledge comes first, then comes love. And that word knowledge, it's the Hebrew word yada in the Old Testament covenant context. It doesn't mean know about, it means to know personally, even intimately. It's the word used when Adam knew Eve in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. It's relational knowledge, not academic. This is how the covenant begins. God reveals himself, not just as creator, but as redeemer. He invites his people into that relationship, grounded in his mercy, where we know him. So Jeremiah 31, when he's speaking about the new covenant, he says, "They shall all know me, from the least to the greatest, for I will forgive their iniquity. That experience of God. You know, the Old Testament people of God, they don't start with obedience or even love. They start with a God who reveals himself in history, who rescues them, and who says, come and know me. That's the foundation. But from that personal, relational knowledge of God, this love then flows. And love leads to a willing obedience. So Deuteronomy 11 verse 1, love the Lord your God and keep his requirements, his decrees, his laws, and his commands always. Love is the key to that. Now that's not primarily emotional, it's motivational, it stirs action, it's a love that works, and it shows in covenant loyalty, that is, in obedience to God. But even in that old covenant context where the law seems to be everything, as in this set of verses here that James is teaching, the obedience doesn't flow from outward observance, but from the love of the heart. Now that runs right through the New Testament context as well, but just one verse, John 14:15. If you love me, he says, you will keep my commandments, and that is how it works. Knowing God through revelation, that's foundational. Loving God is the appropriate relational response to knowing him, and obeying God is the natural and necessary expression of that love. And together they constitute the covenant ideal, a community shaped by God's self-disclosure, transformed by love of the person you come to know, and committed to walking in his ways. And that way, James says, lies the crown of life. Okay, then let's bring it to conclusion. What have we actually got going on here? Look, my friends, James hasn't wasted any time with niceties here, has he? But what he's doing is very loving. He's meaning us extremely well because he wants us to get that crown of life. This isn't a cold, hard theology when he says, consider it all joy when you suffer trials of many kinds. This isn't that. It's heartfelt wisdom from a man who knows what it means to suffer himself and who loves the church enough to tell them the truth. The big issue in this passage for these readers of James's letter has got to be this. God has not abandoned you in your trials. They're not meaningless, they're not purposeless, it's purposeful. God has made it purposeful, that's the truth. It's not lost, it's not wasted, because he's going to do something with it, with you, unless you flunk it. It's the gym, he's training you. Persevere, don't drop out. Like a good coach, like a wise father, like the blacksmith who knows how to shape your steel. Can you trust him to be that person for you in your struggles? That's the challenge of this set of verses here. When things happen, we really need to stay alert to what the Lord might be doing. Keep your eyes up through them as those things surround us. Don't waste those trials. They're too painful to waste. Grip and make sure that you govern your responding mindset. See God's hand in the hardship that is happening. Ask God, who freely gives the wisdom to make sense of it and to know what to do to get through it in his way. And whatever you, don't flinch or fold when the weight gets heavy, because it will be perseverance now with him that leads to glory later. And your Father, the one who gives without finding fault with you, will be with you every step of the way, bringing strength into your soul and wisdom into your head. Stand. Keep steady. Keep walking through those experiences with the living God. The gym might well ache, but the crown is going to be a fit for you. Certainly closer and better and more fulfilling than any human hat has ever been. God bless you. Whatever you face at this point in time. Hey, message me if I can pray for you. But whatever we face, let's face it as those who are using it to walk with God, to seek his strength and his wisdom, so that we might end up not inheriting some earthly paradise, great though it is out here today, but an eternal crown of glory.